this is a flexible mic, so if you would just move the mic mouthpiece close to whoever the speaker is, that would help with the recording of the recordings, okay? It kind of goes like that, all right? So who will be the first speaker?
I'm sorry, Geneva Nov.
Oh, I apologize. And here we go. Tenji McHarris, Director of the Human Rights at Home campaign at the U.S. Human Rights Network. So, and Tenji will speak first, so if you would try to find your way to the mic, that would be good.
Sure.
Well, first, thank you for everyone for coming here today. On behalf of the U.S. Human Rights Network, we are honored to be here with people directly impacted by the use of torture, cruelty, ill treatment by the hands of the United States government. The U.S. Human Rights Network is a human rights organization led by people directly impacted in the U.S. We are people-centered, and we are focused on building and strengthening the U.S. human rights movement. I am honored here today to invite our first speaker, Murat Kornaz, who is a former Guantanamo detainee who was released in 2006. He will share a few words with you, and then we're going to move on to our next speaker.
Hello, my name is Murat Kornaz. I am a Turkish citizen, born and raised in Bremen, Germany. I spent 5 years of my life in U.S. detention in Kandahar and Guantanamo Bay from 2001 to 2006. I believe my story is, with some variations, is true for many in Guantanamo today. In 2001, while traveling in Pakistan, I was arrested by Pakistani police and sold to the U.S. military for a bounty of $3,000. I was 19 years old. I was transferred to the U.S. military base in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and then later to Guantanamo. In Kandahar, I expected Americans would treat me fairly, but I was beaten repeatedly, and during interrogations, my head was dragged underwater to simulate drowning, and electroshocks were sent through my feet. At one point, I was chained and hung by my hands for a long time. A doctor sometimes checked if I was okay, then I would be hung up again. In Guantanamo, I suffered religious humiliation. I was also beaten, deprived of sleep and food, and kept in solitary confinement for many months for no reason. And then I got out. 8 years later, I cannot believe that Guantanamo is still open. I worry about the men who are still there. My time in Guantanamo was a nightmare, but sometimes consider myself lucky. At least I have had the chance to build a life for myself. I have a wife and 2 children, and I am surrounded by my family. I know that part of the reason I am here today is because I am from Germany, and the German government ultimately negotiate for my release. Most of the men in Guantanamo today remain because they are from Yemen, and the U.S. refused to send them home. Many are as innocent as I was, but they have been enduring the torture of Guantanamo for over 12 years because of their nationality, not because of anything they have done. Of the 148 men who are currently in Guantanamo, 79, more than half, have been cleared for release. The U.S. has known of their innocence for years, and there are dozens for more who will never be charged with the crime. President Obama may have banned many of the abuse interrogations practices that were done to me, but torture continues at Guantanamo. The psychological torture of identified detention may not leave marks on the skin, but it's unbearable all the same. Prisoners continue to hunger strike at Guantanamo and are aggressively forced force-feed daily. Many are kept in solitary confinement. These are all forms of torture. I want to ask, if the U.S. is a democracy, how could it create a secret prison without any law? How could it torture people? And how could it not punish those people who have committed or ordered torture? I want to ask if the U.S. has signed the Convention Against Torture. How can this be? Aren't they required to prosecute the tortures? Isn't that how we can end torture in the world? U.S. courts have closed their doors to me and other victims. So I have worked with lawyers at the Center of Constitutional Rights to seek justice in foreign courts in Canada and Spain. And to came here today, I want to ask the United Nations to listen and to act. The committee must ensure the United States close Guantanamo, punish those responsible for the horrors that happened there, and provide redress to those who were tortured. I will not give up my struggle to tell the story of torture by the U.S. government and to speak out for other victims of Guantanamo until justice is done. Thank you. Yeah.
Our next speaker is Walter Ruiz, an attorney for a Guantanamo detainee.
Good afternoon. My name is Walter Ruiz, R-U-I-Z. I'm an attorney for Mustafa al-Hassawi. And first, please let me thank the United States Human Rights Network for all of their efforts in putting this event together, as well as the International Commission of Jurists, Redress, and the World Organization Against Torture. The United States policy of picking and choosing which human rights to uphold violates the Convention Against Torture. Today you heard the statements from the delegation from the United States, and today one of the most significant statements that was made was perhaps that in their estimation the Convention Against Torture does in fact apply to territories under the United States control, such as Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, as well as in all airplanes and vessels. However, as you may have heard from the committee, the very pointed question is why that jurisdiction does not extend anywhere and any time, consistent with the protections of the Convention Against Torture, which have no limitations whatsoever. The attempt by our government to impose limitations on the Convention Against Torture is a fundamental violation of the Convention Against Torture. The positions taken by the delegation today belie the statements made by President Obama when he says that we will abide by the Convention Against Torture. That is not the case. In my representation in Guantanamo Bay, what is very clear is that the United States government's actions betray the rhetoric and the diplomatic double talk that you hear at events such as this. The most insidious policy right now in Guantanamo Bay, and there are many to choose from, is that victims of terror, people who have been convicted in Guantanamo, I'm sorry, I'm going to wait for that to stop. Is that it? Okay. The most insidious policy that we deal with now in Guantanamo Bay, and one that applies not just to Guantanamo but across the board, because what you see in these cases is abuse of power and authority and arrogance, and you'll hear that in all of the statements that you'll hear today, is that men who have been tortured and are victims of torture are not allowed to complain or to seek redress in international forums before party states or other countries who may in fact recognize and faithfully abide by the Convention Against Torture's protections. That is a very different question from whether the United States recognizes an individual right of action within the United States and in United States courts. This policy is far more pervasive because it prevents a victim of torture from seeking the protections of the Convention Against Torture against countries who actually abide by those protections and recognize those protections. And you heard members from the Committee Against Torture today ask the United States if in fact the policies in effect extinguish torture victims' rights in Guantanamo Bay. And that was the essence of their request. That was the essence of their question. That's all the comments I have, and I'm open to answering any questions for you next.
Yeah. Before I introduce speakers, a very, very powerful two people who have really, in a very extraordinary and powerful way, advocated for justice after the death of their son. I'm going to introduce their lawyer and one of their advocates. Daryl, introduce them.
Very much. On behalf of Mr. Michael Brown Sr. and to the United States Human Rights Network for the invitation to come as part of this delegation to the United Nations. This is a very special opportunity for us in that obviously back home there are some serious decisions that are about to be made by a grand jury. They will not make it to the grand jury or to the perpetrator who killed their son. So please respect that. Now, it's important that they are here, though, because as a country of civil society, the United States of America, we really pride ourselves on making sure that human injustices don't take place. Michael Brown Jr. is the victim of a human injustice. And certainly, we believe that our United States government, under the direction of our president, has taken great steps to address the situation that exists in Ferguson City and St. Louis County, Missouri. There are some serious issues that exist as to the actions, though, of the city of Ferguson, Missouri, and as it relates to St. Louis County, Missouri, in this situation. And so we've been presented with the question as to why they come to the United Nations. And we've thought about that and talked about it a lot. And it's a very simple answer, actually. Probably the most powerful thing that the United Nations offers is perception. It's the same thing that we use against other countries as a country. When we look at other countries, when they have atrocities that exist in their countries where people are killed and lose their lives, and when the government doesn't respond, any aspect of the government. And so we have a situation, I recall one of the comments that they made to us yesterday regarding how they had been treated as victims in this situation. And they do not believe that the city and county has shown them the respect and given them the proper redress that they should have gotten as a victim. The opposite, in fact, has happened. The officer has been treated as the victim. The officer has been the one that's been protected. And so those are major problems. As a family, they're very encouraged by the actions that the United States Department of Justice has taken within that community. And as y'all may know, they're doing police training, they're doing many different things to address some of the things that have happened to try and change things for the future. But being at the UN is quite appropriate. And I think I'll take one of the comments from Michael Sr. yesterday. And it's a simple message that all life matters and black life matters too. And that was a comment he made yesterday I thought was so appropriate because it sends the right clear statement that the life of Michael Brown Jr. is a life worth fighting about, is a life that if anyone questioned why they would take this fight all away, should question themselves as to why they would not see the value in the life of Michael Brown. Remember what happened in this case. Their son was murdered and laid for almost 5 hours in the street like an animal. And they could do nothing about it. That action alone indicates that the people who were attempting to investigate it had very little sensitivity to the life that had been lost there. And so that's why we've come here today, because this is the proper stage on the world stage when you have atrocities like Michael's death that happened at the hands of law enforcement. and the attitudes and approaches. I mean, a big part of this is an attempt to change the attitude and the approach by the city of Ferguson and St. Louis County as they look at the redress for this loss of life at the hands of a police officer. Thank you so much. And they probably don't want to say much right now. Would you like to say something right now? Or have I said enough for you? Okay. So they've chosen not to say much, and the big part of the reason is that over the next 2 or 3 days, there are a lot of sensitive issues that are taking place, and that they have been advised not to talk too much publicly about it. But I will take some questions if you have questions related to the trip here to Geneva and the situation involving the death of Michael Brown Jr. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, in Blackburn, Ferguson, it appears there's a very tense situation waiting for the decision of the grand jury. I wonder if Mr. Brown Sr. and Michael Jr.'s mother have any comment on what they would like to see happen in the city.
Well, without question, they continue to ask for nonviolence, and they continue to believe that this grand jury will do the right thing and will indict this officer for the death of their son. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, Imogen Folks, BBC. I'd like to hear from both of you what you think the UN Committee Against Torture can help you with.
Well, certainly they can make observations to the United States government concerning what they believe to be torture of Michael Brown Sr. in this situation. So it's the same interaction that the committee is going to have with the government in terms of things that it's observing and actions that our government is willing to take to address some of these issues. Other questions? Yes.
Can you go a bit more into detail on what way it constitutes torture? Obviously, you know, it's a great injustice, but
What's the level of force? Anytime you talk about police action, it's the level of force. The amount of force that was used in this situation was not necessary. It wasn't necessary to take Michael Brown Jr.'s life, given the situation that the officer was confronted with. And totally, I mean, the kid was running away from him, so it was not necessary for him to continue shooting at Michael as Michael Jr. was running away. So in that regard, that was totally a use of force that was unnecessary and a lack of appreciation for the life that he was about to take.
And I can also speak to a bit about the torture in this. So the issue of, like Daryl just mentioned, excessive use of force at the hands of law enforcement, and more specifically, police torture and ill treatment by the police is actually something that has been documented in a number of cities throughout the country. And so talking about it from a torture perspective and framework and the lack of compliance with the convention is a way in which we hope that we can not just shift the perception about what's happening in the United States, but also have it impact advocacy and seeking justice locally in the country.
And also, I think it's probably necessary for members of the media to educate the public in terms of the mission of this committee. The mission of this committee includes excessive use of force by police. So I think that the caption of the committee may throw some people off who are too naive to read further into the mission and definition of the committee. As you read further into the definition and mission of the committee, then you understand why it's at this particular committee.
We want to give you. Oh.
I'll give you Michael Brown Sr. Okay.
And he's going to say something very short. Yeah, but he's not going to go in or answer questions. Just something that so you have him speaking.
Just to be able to see him. Yeah, because he knows we have a line of journalists. Okay.
As short as you want.
came to the. Thank you for having us. I want to say that me and his mother, we came here to the UN to get justice for our son. We think that it couldn't be a better place that we can start at. And we want to just thank y'all for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you. Any more questions for you, Daryl?
Any more questions?
May I have one question? Oh, yes,
Go ahead.
Marco Palace Paris News Agency. I understand they met yesterday with some members of the committee. Is that right? And
Correct.
Yes, with whom and what did they
The full
say?
committee.
The full committee. And what it was about, and then do they
So-
have any answer you can share with us, like something like
Well, they met with the full committee on yesterday, and obviously you can look at the committee transcript in terms of things that they said. But it's pretty much that they just brought attention to the facts surrounding what happened to their son. One, to ask for the United Nations to continue to question our government about the unfair treatment and taking of life in certain situations in our country. I believe that hopefully our government will continue to respond in that they are getting involved locally with the local governments who continue to not get it right in terms of how it treats its citizens.
And one thing that Michael Brown Sr. also in his testimony called for a national plan of action for racial justice.
May I just ask on that, can you provide testimony in front of the committee? Were you able to do that?
Yes.
And did you get any kind of a reaction from them? And then I'm wondering whether you've been in any sort of dialogue with any of the U.S. delegates.
Well, yesterday they did not participate in the consultation aspect with the U.S. delegation. I did that on their behalf. But let me say, and I've said it twice here today, I think that we already have seen a very strong reaction from the U.S. government to what happened to Michael Brown Jr. However, the challenge becomes as our government continues to try and work with the city and county on the ground in Missouri to make things better going into the future. That's the challenge.
Do you think your presence here will have any kind of an impact upon the people that you're trying to reach?
Without question. Without question. You know, I'll share this with you. Missouri is a very international place. In fact, on the flight that we took from St. Louis to here, there was a strong contingent of international visitors. And so I think that Missouri is the type of place that has always been an international place, and that the perception that the international community has of that community matters. And so that happens to be an additional way of making locals do the right thing as it relates to its citizens. That without question, they don't want to have the wrong perception as to this is how we treat our people. Yes, sir.
John Hubbard, Associated Press. Do you have any idea why the committee today, after hearing from you yesterday, made absolutely no specific reference to the case, had not a single question to the U.S. government about the case?
Well, I think also there are two parts to the committee meeting also that's happening. There's a continuation, so I don't think it's, I mean, we're here till Friday.
Right, but tomorrow the government is required to follow up with answers to the questions that were asked today. But because they were asked no questions about it and there was no specific reference today, they're not required to mention that tomorrow.
I don't think there's a requirement, but I think we should expect some type of them to address it in some degree, yes. Thank you all so much.
I have another question.
Okay.
I'm Gabriela Sotomayor from Mexican News Agency. Do you think that the person that killed your son deserves the death penalty?
No, we want
We're not
he
answering.
deserves to be indicted. We want a fair trial. That's all we're asking for. All right. Come on, put them in first. Relax. Let's figure out what we're doing.
Okay. That question is not okay.
Let's have another one.
You find an exit. Any exit.
So not much
Are we done for now? Are we done for now?
I don't know. Let's wait here. We can. It's pretty warm.
Yeah, that was pretty brutal.
Sorry, can I ask you a question? This question.
That her asked me his lawyer.
His lawyer, okay.